have Kentucky Senator and Republican presidential candidate Rand Paul in our center seat tonight. Joining me on the panel, Nina Easton, columnist for Fortune magazine, Ron Fournier, senior political columnist of National Journal, and editor-in-chief of LifeZette, Laura Ingraham. Senator, thanks for being here.
Glad to be with you.
You know, Republicans have had concerns about some of your foreign policy stances, some of the things you've talked about on foreign policy. Now,
I've had some concerns with their foreign policy as well.
And you've noted them many times. Now with Russia taking an active role in Syria, a lot of people want to know what you would do as president. We asked people on Twitter and Facebook to write in. Yolanda Buford writes in, how do you feel about Putin, Russia replacing the U.S. as leadership role in the Middle East? What would you do?
Well, I think the first thing we need to know is how we got here, and then the second thing we need to know is what is important to do so we don't get into a situation that we can't get out of. During the Cold War, we had many altercations with Russia and the Soviet Union at a time where the tension was much greater and much more potentially dangerous. What I think is reckless and irresponsible of some of my colleagues who on the presidential stage is to say, oh, we're not going to talk to Putin. Well, having no relations or communicate with Putin is exactly the wrong thing to do. Others have now been saying we need to be prepared to use force against Russia. And it's like, my goodness, we avoided that for 70 years in the Cold War. I don't think that's a good idea. And then others are saying, well, we need to draw a red line. We need to have a no-fly zone. Well, that's also a recipe for disaster, for either an accidental or a purposeful shooting down by one country or the other. I think we have to look at how we got here. How did we get here? We used to have Saddam Hussein, a tyrant who opposed Iran. He's gone now. Iran is stronger. Iran is now allied with Iraq. Who gave flyover permission for Russia to go into Syria? Iraq. Who said today that they're inviting Russia and want Russia to attack ISIS? Iraq. It's going to be a little hard for us to say Russia go home when Syria, Iraq, and Iran are all saying they want Russia to be there.
I get that looking back, but looking forward, what are you doing as President Paul? Are you okay that Russia is doing what it's doing, even though they're attacking rebels on the ground by all accounts?
I don't think I would put it that way, that I'm okay with it. What I would say is that we need to stand up for our position in the world. But there's not a position, what are we going to do? Do you want to drive Russia out of Syria? Do you want to have a land war with Russia? I mean, there is no sort of scenario in which America can just stand up and say, be gone, Russia. I think what we need to do is make sure that an accident doesn't happen, make sure that we have open lines of communication, make sure that Russia knows what our position is on this, so we communicate our displeasure and we try to say this is not something we feel. But, you know, is there a military solution to this? There isn't a military solution.
Sure.
I think it's interesting to listen to Senator Paul because he is reflecting exactly what Donald Trump said with you last night in the interview when we talked about foreign policy and before.
Like that,
and well, Gaddafi, he said better for Gaddafi to be in power, better for Hussein to be in power.
He's been listening to my speeches,
well,
obviously.
Perhaps, but it's a fascinating divergence in the Republican Party, and I think it's fueling the support that you get on college campuses and beyond, and fueling some of what Trump is finding out there as well. People want America to be strong, but they also like the idea of a humble foreign policy that's a smart foreign policy, which is what George W. Bush campaigned on until 9/11 happened. But it's a complicated scenario, right? Because we obviously don't want Russia to become the #1 power broker in the Middle East. Yet America doesn't have an appetite to go full force into the Middle East.
It's also why we do have to look backwards as well as looking forward. You have to learn from the past, and when you look at the past, if there's one clear thing in the Middle East to learn, it's that every time we've toppled a secular dictator, every time we've gotten rid of one of the iron fists, we've gotten chaos, the rise of radical Islam, and it turns out the unintended consequences were worse than maybe the situation was before.
Well, I'm still not sure what you would do about Putin and Russia, but let's go to the Pentagon budget. It's $600 billion right now.
Who do you know that is sure?
Pardon me?
Who do you know that is sure of what we would do? I've already told you what I won't do, and what I wouldn't do is a no-fly zone. I think that's a huge mistake and endangers World War III. I would not close communication, so I would diplomatically engage. I would express our opinion. But the thing is I think war with Russia is a really bad idea, and I can tell you that the people in my party who are saying don't talk to Putin, have a no-fly zone, be prepared to use force against Russia, that's all very scary to me and the wrong approach.
The Pentagon has a $600 billion budget. 4 or 5 months ago, you suggested that was bloated, telling Joe Scarborough, do I think we need more than all of the next 14 countries combined? I think that needs to be examined. You've had more than 4 months to examine it. Yes or no, do we need this much money?
Well, I just had a vote today where I was the lone Republican that said, I'm not voting for the defense spending and this extra war funding on top of that, because I think really the problem with our deficit, if you're truly a conservative, yeah, you have to look at both the military and the domestic welfare. Instead, we do the opposite. We have an unholy alliance between right and left up here. The right wants more military spending, the left wants more domestic. What happens? The unholy alliance comes together and get more spending for everything, but that's also why we're $18 trillion in debt, and it's also why I'm frankly the only conservative running on either side, because I'd be willing to cut both.
Well, you would bring us down below $600 billion.
What I would say is that you have to be able to cut across the board. That's what the sequester was. Now, some of the sequester was a cut in the rate of growth, but it was cutting across the board and actually was something that was slowing down the accumulation of debt. And we abandoned most of that last year, and that what's coming up now and what many of the leadership are saying, yes, we're going to bust the budget caps. The last remaining vestige of control is going to be busted, but not because of Democrats, because of an unholy alliance between the right and the left who are so avaricious for more spending that they can't get enough.
Nina.
Senator, going back to your position on Syria and your overall sense of foreign policy, there's a compelling argument to be made that the reason Russia felt licensed to go into Syria is because we didn't stand up to Putin over the Ukraine, that we didn't arm Ukrainian rebels. Which raises the question, what is the difference between being non-interventionist and weak global leadership by the U.S. that eventually puts the U.S. at risk?
Well, I think if you look at the region and you say, why is Syria now involved in the region? You might say, well, if we look back, had we not gotten involved in the Iraq war to begin with, maybe Russia wouldn't be so involved. So maybe it's an unintended consequence of the Iraq war. In the Ukraine, there was no real military solution to removing Crimea, removing the Russians from Crimea. There was no real military solution that anyone, even from the farthest right wing of our party, was proposing to do as far as pushing them out of Ukraine. As far as arming Ukraine with self-defense, I actually favor that.
Back with domestic policy questions for Senator Paul after a quick break.